some upward trends for you. We're increasingly on our mobiles. Households now with only a mobile phone. We're doing all our grocery shopping online. And I don't know if there's a link there, but in an increasingly maybe immobile society, now we've got more people who are obese. Some downward trends. Are we choosing to learn to drive a little bit later? So the vehicles and infrastructure of the information age are maturing rapidly. I'm going to go on to this in a minute. Is the hold on the motor age weakening? Neither the use of the car or the internet helps with public health issues. And our towns and cities need to be robust and able to adapt to change.
Often is that a lot of cities want to be innovative, but not all of them want to be first. And that's a bit of a paradox, but there's a lot of risk in innovation. There's a financial risk, political risk, a risk of effectiveness or uncertainty about effectiveness.
But the key challenge then is to gain trust between users, and that's probably the most interesting aspect, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more. So the first thing I mentioned is integration with social networks. So before we created Go Car Share, there was the work on the platforms that connected people so they could share car journeys. What we've really kind of focused on at the time was the integration with social networks, and we did a survey just as we were starting in 2010, and we asked people if they would share a car journey with someone they didn't know, and 10% of people said they would. This was at Durham University. But then we asked people again if they would share a car journey with someone who's a friend of a friend, and 67% of people said yes. So I think there's quite interesting kind of implications when you start to look at the kind of social graph and what that does in terms of creating trust and confidence.
And that's really important, because if we look at lots of the communication for some of these car sharing schemes, we have Zipcar talking about going green, eCar talking about reducing emissions, Heart talking about the environmental benefits. Actually, these really don't resonate with people. These aren't the motivating factors, and that's consistent across lots of categories we've worked in over the last few years. It's a nice to have, but it doesn't really change behaviour. So it's really good to hear Drummond say, actually, for us, that's not the main thing we position our business model on. That's an additional thing, but that's not motivating enough, and that's exactly what we've seen here. We then looked into some of the barriers to consideration so far, and these broadly split into two categories, the functional and the emotional. So firstly, the functional then. People talk about flexibility and say, what if I come to rely on this? You know, I've used Uber and I've gone to get a taxi or a private car, and I've got surge pricing and I can't afford it anymore. Is this really reliable? Is it going to be available the whole time for me? Families or people with slightly different needs. Maybe you want 7 seats in your car. Maybe you want a car seat. That is an issue people foresee with this sort of system. Public transport preferers, largely based in the UK, where they say, actually, I don't really have a need for this. I can use public transport quite easily anyway when I don't want to use my own car. And the expense, for people looking at this for a regular usage, they say it just doesn't really add up. If I'm going to use this every day, I'm better off owning my own car. And then emotional factors as well. So first of all, freedom. Picking up your keys and going driving, especially in North America, is such a powerful emotional connection that this concept really struggles to compete with that. And the emotional attachment to the car. Anyone that's had a nickname for their car at some point, or fluffy dice hanging from their wing mirror, knows that your car is not just another object you own, it's something more than that. And this can't really equal that. And then finally, venturing into the unknown, particularly in China. A lot of people saying, well, I like the idea, but I don't want to be the first person to do this. I want it to be proven first. And the things that do matter are safety, flexibility, and stress-free travel. Consumers are less motivated by the environmental impact, and those are the things that at the moment are being talked about too much.
And young people are frankly losing interest in cars. They're not as interested as they were, say 10, 20 years ago, predominantly just because they're too expensive. Ageing population, 8,000 people turning 65 every day. So by 2050, 2 billion over 65s. Why is that interesting? How is that relevant for automotive? Certain Japanese manufacturers have started to take this statistic really seriously in terms of their car design, and it's starting to see much more semi-autonomous features going into those vehicles. So we're not talking about self-driving cars, we're talking about much more driver-assisted stuff. So lane detection, even things like night vision, parking, cruise control, becoming much common features in cars, but seriously being driven by an ageing population.
I was talking to George Ferguson, who's the elected mayor of Bristol, a couple of weeks ago, so an event not dissimilar to this, and asking him about what he thought the barriers were for smart cities of the future. And he said that he thought that cities had to become an order of magnitude more citizen-oriented in order to be competitive in the future. And I guess that's really at the heart of what we're trying to do. And the way that we do it is to turn people's perception into data. So it's all about measuring sentiment, but measuring it in relation to geography and demographic and theme.